She screamed at me from her porch, "Control your kid before I do it for you," and the next second, her son slammed a baseball bat into my daughter's head. The sound still echoes in my mind. My little girl, Emma, fell face first on the sidewalk, her pink bike rolling away. I ran to her, hands shaking, shouting for help. But Karen just stood there, arms crossed, sipping her iced coffee like nothing happened. Her son, a chubby blonde kid with a mean grin, dropped the bat and said, "Mom told me to teach her a lesson." I couldn't breathe. My wife screamed, neighbors started gathering, phones came out. Karen smirked and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You people don't belong in this neighborhood. Maybe now you'll learn the rules." I lifted Emma in my arms, blood on my shirt, and said, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh please, go ahead, call the cops. My brother is one." That's when I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I took Emma to the hospital, holding her tiny hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. But deep inside, I wasn't just broken. I was waiting, because what she didn't know was who Emma's mother really was. And when she finds out, this street's going to go silent. Never mess with a mom who used to train the people you call for help. That night, the house was quiet, too quiet. My wife, Laura, sat beside Emma's hospital bed, her face calm but her eyes burning. She didn't cry. She never cried. Not since she left her job 3 years ago. Everyone in town thought she was just a gentle nurse now, no one knew the truth. When the doctor stepped out, Laura whispered, "He hit her with intent. That wasn't a kid's accident." I nodded, gripping the edge of the chair. "Karen said her brother's a cop," I muttered. Laura gave a cold little smile. "Then it's about to get interesting." By morning, I went home to grab some clothes for Emma. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, I saw Karen standing in my yard, holding a clipboard, slapping fake HOA notices on my front door. "You violated community rules," she said, acting official. "Your child's outburst caused property damage and disturbance. You have 24 hours to vacate." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're insane. You think you can kick us out after what your son did?" She tilted her sunglasses down and said, "Oh, sweetie, I make the rules here. My brother already filed a report. You attacked my child." That's when I saw 2 patrol cars pulling up. My stomach dropped, until I noticed something strange. Laura was already there. She walked straight past the cops, didn't say a word, just handed them a small black folder. One of the officers opened it, and his face went pale. Karen frowned. "What's that supposed to be?" Laura looked at her, voice steady as ice. "It's your worst nightmare, Karen." The officer turned to Karen and said quietly, "Ma'am, I think you should step aside." Karen's fake smile faded. "Excuse me, you don't tell me what to step aside." That was the first time Karen looked unsure. Because the folder Laura handed them wasn't just paperwork, it was a badge. "You called the cops on the woman who trained them." Karen's smirk twisted into confusion. "What kind of game is this?" she said, trying to laugh, but her voice cracked. The taller officer glanced at Laura with pure respect. "Ma'am, I didn't know you were back." Laura just nodded slightly, her tone calm but sharp. "Didn't plan to be. But this woman left my daughter bleeding on the pavement." Karen blinked fast, her face losing color. "Your daughter? Wait, you mean that little girl who ran into my son's swing?" Laura stepped closer, her stare cutting through the air. "Your son aimed for her head. I have footage." She turned to me, and I handed over the small flash drive I'd pulled from our porch camera that morning. The officer plugged it into his car system, and within seconds, the truth played out, Karen in the background shouting, "Do it," while her son swung the bat. The silence that followed was heavy. Karen stuttered, that's edited. My brother, he'll fix this." The younger cop turned around and said flatly, "Your brother's already under investigation for falsifying reports. Maybe you should have checked your timing." Karen's jaw dropped. She looked around, hoping the neighbors who had gathered would defend her, but everyone stood frozen, phones recording again. Laura folded her arms. "You've used fake HOA power for too long. That ends today." Karen's face twisted in panic. "You can't do this to me. You don't even live here legally." I stepped forward, holding up a set of old property papers. "Actually, this land belonged to my grandfather long before your HOA even existed." Karen's eyes darted between me and Laura. "You're lying." Laura smiled faintly. You really should have read Who Owns What before you picked a fight. The taller cop spoke into his radio. Dispatch, we're bringing in one suspect for assault and trespassing. Karen shouted, you can't arrest me. I am the HOA. But the officer already had her wrists behind her back. Laura leaned in close and whispered something that only I could hear, but the mic caught it too. You should have thought twice before swinging at a federal agent's child. Karen froze. Her whole body stiffened like she'd been struck. Federal, what? She stammered, her voice trembling now. Laura didn't answer. She just looked at the officer and said, make sure the report reaches internal affairs directly. I'll handle the rest. The moment the handcuffs clicked, neighbors started whispering. Phones were up again, catching every second. Karen's perfect neighborhood image was collapsing in real time. You're all making a mistake. She shouted. I know people, big people. Laura finally turned to her and said, softly, so do I. Except mine wear real badges. The officer opened the squad car door, but before Karen stepped in, her son came running out of their house crying. Mom, what's happening? He yelled. For a moment, even Laura's eyes softened. She crouched to his level and said, what you did hurt someone, son. But it's not too late to be better than this. Karen's son looked at her through tears, and for the first time, Karen didn't have an answer. She just sat in the car, silent, humiliated. The door shut, and the car rolled away. The crowd started clapping, quietly at first, then louder. One of the older neighbors, a man who'd always kept to himself, stepped forward and said, about time someone stood up to her. She's been terrorizing folks here for years. Laura nodded, her tone calm but firm. No one owns kindness. But people like her think they can buy fear. That line spread fast, everyone was murmuring it, recording, posting. Within hours, the video hit social media, and Karen's face was everywhere. While lady arrested after assault on child, ex-federal agent exposes her lies. By evening, our porch was filled with flowers and cards from neighbors who'd once been too scared to speak up. Emma was back home, resting, her head bandaged but smiling. I looked at Laura, who was sitting by the window, the sunset painting her face gold. You planned this, didn't you? I asked quietly. She smiled without looking at me. No, I just let the truth do its job. And as the sirens faded in the distance, I realized something, the quiet that returned to our street wasn't fear anymore. It was peace. Justice doesn't shout. It just shows up when you least expect it. The next morning, sunlight poured through our living room window, and for the first time in weeks, the street outside was calm. No more HOA notes. No Karen watching from her porch. Just birds, wind, and peace. Emma sat on the couch with a small smile, her head wrapped in a soft bandage, drawing pictures of our family. Laura came out of the kitchen holding coffee and her old badge. She turned it in her hand, staring at it for a long moment before saying, I never wanted to use this again. I left that world for a reason. I asked, then why now? She looked at me, not angry, not proud, just steady. Because when someone thinks they can hurt a child and walk away, that's not a neighborhood problem. That's a moral one. A knock came on the door. It was the same officer from yesterday. He had a small smile. Just wanted to let you know, the DA's pressing full charges. And, the department wanted to thank you, ma'am. Your report exposed a bigger mess inside the HOA Council. Seems your neighbor's brother was running fake citations for money. Laura sighed, almost tired. Figures. Corruption loves quiet streets. The officer chuckled. Well, it's quiet now, thanks to you too. He looked at Emma. How's the little hero? Emma smiled shyly. Mom says I'm tougher than any villain. Everyone laughed softly, and for the first time, it felt real again, like home. As the officer left, I turned to Laura. You know, I said, you might have just started something bigger than this street. She took a deep breath, staring out the window where Karen's house now stood dark and empty. Good, she said quietly. Because people like her don't stop until someone makes them. Then she looked at me, and her eyes softened. But we're done now. No more fighting. Just living. I nodded. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying away the last pieces of the storm Karen brought into our lives. Out there, the world would keep watching our story, the viral clips, the headlines, the hashtags. But in our home, it was simple again. My daughter was safe. My wife was smiling. And the woman who thought she owned the world, finally learned who she was really dealing with. The strongest people are the quiet ones, until you touch what they love. The night sky was calm again, the same streetlights that once felt cold now glowing softly against our home. Emma slept peacefully between us on the couch, her tiny hand resting on Laura's arm. The house smelled like hot cocoa and quiet, the kind of peace you only notice after chaos. Across the street, Karen's house stood empty. A "for sale" sign leaned crooked on the lawn, her once perfect garden turning brown. The same neighbors who used to fear her now walked their dogs freely, waving when they passed by. The street finally felt alive. I stood by the window, watching the calm neighborhood she once ruled through fear. Laura walked up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "It's over," she whispered. "Yeah," I said, still staring outside. "But people will remember what happened here." Laura smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe they'll remember that silence only helps the wrong side." She kissed my shoulder and went back to tuck Emma in. I stayed for a moment longer, thinking about everything we lost, and everything we gained back. The next day, we found an envelope on our porch. No name, just a short note inside that read, "Thank you for standing up when no one else could. The neighborhood owes you." There was no signature, just a tiny drawing of a heart and the initials of 3 families who'd once been Karen's victims. I smiled. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger: respect, truth, and peace. As I closed the door and looked at Laura and Emma laughing in the kitchen, I realized something. Karen's noise had never really been about control, it was about fear. And we ended that, not with anger, but with truth. Sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom or with handcuffs. Sometimes, it's just a quiet morning, where your child's laughter is louder than the hate that tried to break you. They tried to take our peace, so we showed them what strength really looks like. The end.